Welcome, viewers. You are about to hear a captivating tale filled with mystery and suspense, written and narrated by me, Vincent Gray, exclusively for the Detective Chronicles channel. Prepare yourself for a story where every shadow hides a secret, and every clue leads deeper into the unknown. Don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss a twist in the tale. Vincent Gray, Sherlock Holmes, the Cryptic Clue in the Candlelight. The carriage rattled across the narrow road, the rhythmic thud of its wheels echoing into the fog that clung to the countryside. London, with its smoke and clamour, seemed miles away as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson ventured toward the isolated estate of Sir Reginald Blackwood. Holmes, as ever, sat in silence, his sharp eyes scanning the shifting mist beyond the carriage window. His mind, a labyrinth of thoughts, held him captive as the darkening evening closed in. The horses' hooves struck the cobbled road, their clatter mingling with the low whistle of the wind that curled through the branches of the gnarled trees lining the path. The sky, a muted grey, seemed to press down on the earth with an oppressive weight. Watson, beside him, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, casting occasional glances at his companion. Holmes, in his usual manner, appeared indifferent to the dismal landscape, his focus elsewhere, perhaps on the case that awaited them, or on thoughts that had yet to be voiced. "So, Holmes," Watson began, breaking the silence, "what exactly have we come here for?" Sir Reginald's letter was vague at best. "You suspect foul play?" Holmes didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the world outside the carriage. The question had been expected, yet it still felt as though it needed no answer. Watson, familiar with the subtle gestures of his friend, noticed the slight tension in Holmes's posture, a tension that was rarely visible. Holmes's fingers tightened around the edge of his seat, and for a brief moment he seemed almost as if he were steeling himself for something. "Not just foul play, Watson," Holmes finally spoke, his voice low and contemplative. "There is something more to this, something that connects Sir Reginald Blackwood's present situation to events of the past. The letter he sent, that cryptic message. It's not the first time someone has sought my expertise in matters veiled in secrecy." "Something from his past, you say?" Watson's brow furrowed in thought. "And you believe the answers lie within this very estate?" Holmes gave a short nod. "Indeed. You'll see, Watson. A case like this never presents itself plainly. Sir Reginald's reputation precedes him, but his past is a different matter entirely." The carriage swerved slightly as they approached a sharp bend in the road, the dark silhouette of the estate emerging from the fog. The house loomed ahead, its towering spires like a darkened crown against the dull sky. Windows, now dark, stared back at them like empty eyes. There was no warmth in its presence, only cold stone and shadows that seemed to stretch far too long across the ground. As they neared the iron gates, which creaked open at their arrival, Watson couldn't help but feel a chill creep up his spine. "It's as if the place itself is waiting." Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps it is. Or perhaps it is the last vestige of something that should have been forgotten long ago." The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the grand yet weather-worn entrance. The air was thick with dampness, the scent of earth and wood rot mixing with the faint tang of mildew that emanated from the old stonework. A shadow moved within the archway, and a figure appeared at the door. Sir Reginald Blackwood, though middle-aged, still held an air of authority, his tall frame casting an imposing shadow. His face was pale, his features tight with concern that only deepened when he saw Holmes step out of the carriage. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Sir Reginald greeted, his voice shaky, though he tried to mask it with forced politeness. "Thank you for coming." Holmes gave a slight nod, his sharp eyes scanning Sir Reginald's face, noting the tension around his eyes, the slight quiver in his hands. It was as though the very act of speaking brought him discomfort. "Your letter, Sir Reginald, spoke of a matter that needed immediate attention. I trust that is still the case?" "Yes, of course," Sir Reginald replied quickly, his gaze darting toward the mansion behind him, as if seeking refuge in its darkened halls. Come inside. You must see for yourselves." The warmth of the mansion offered a brief respite from the biting chill outside, but the inside was no more welcoming. Dark wooden panels lined the walls, and the faint glow of candlelight barely illuminated the vast entryway. The furniture was grand but aged, with thick dust settled on every surface, as though the house itself had grown tired of waiting. Holmes's eyes roamed the room, his senses working overtime, absorbing every detail. The musty smell of old wood and paper filled his nostrils, mingling with the scent of wax from the candles. In the faint glow, Holmes could make out the edges of a painting on the wall, an oil portrait of a man who, though unfamiliar, struck Holmes with a peculiar sense of recognition. The man was dressed in old-fashioned attire, his eyes strangely intense for one so still. "You have a rather peculiar taste in art, Sir Reginald," Holmes remarked casually, his gaze lingering on the portrait. Sir Reginald stiffened, his eyes flickering toward the painting. "That's a portrait of my late father. He was a man of great influence. I trust you'll find it. Nothing more than an eccentricity." Holmes raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Eccentricities, Sir Reginald, are often the key to understanding the hidden nature of a man. But I will reserve further judgment until we've had the opportunity to speak in more detail." Sir Reginald led them through a long hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. As they moved deeper into the house, Holmes could hear the faint rustling of something, or someone, moving behind closed doors. Yet no one else seemed to be present. It was all too silent, too still. Finally, they arrived at a large study, the door swinging open to reveal a room draped in shadows. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting an eerie glow across the room. A large desk sat at the far end, papers scattered across it haphazardly. But it was the single object on the desk that caught Holmes's attention. The candle holder, recently knocked over, its wax pooling in unnatural patterns. Holmes stepped forward, his sharp gaze analysing the scene, each detail carved into his mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "I see," he murmured, more to himself than to Sir Reginald. This is only the beginning." The fire in the hearth crackled softly, sending gentle, flickering shadows across the dark walls of Sir Reginald's study. The warmth from the flames did little to dispel the cold sense of unease that permeated the room, though it was not entirely unwelcome. Holmes stood at the desk, his eyes tracing the remnants of the overturned candle holder, while Watson leaned against the far wall, observing Sir Reginald's every move with quiet scrutiny. Sir Reginald's discomfort was palpable as he fidgeted with his cufflinks, a nervous habit he had seemingly forgotten to hide. "I must apologise for the state of the room, gentlemen," he said, his voice strained. "The incident earlier today has unsettled me. I trust you'll understand." Holmes, who had already noted the unspoken tension in Sir Reginald's words, did not reply immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch between them, as if his mere presence could draw out the truth. Watson, sensing the momentary standoff, spoke up with his usual tact. "No apology is necessary, Sir Reginald. We are here to help, after all," Watson offered, though his smile held little warmth. His eyes moved to the scattered papers on the desk, the half-burnt candle, and the overall disarray that contrasted sharply with the otherwise meticulous decor of the study. Sir Reginald nodded stiffly, his expression not quite meeting their gaze. "Of course. I merely thought—" He trailed off, as though the words would not come. A deep sigh escaped him before he straightened, visibly attempting to regain some semblance of composure. "Allow me to introduce you to the others in the household. Perhaps you may begin to understand the gravity of the situation." As if on cue, the door to the study opened, and a tall woman entered with a regal air, her posture straight, but there was a tension to her movements. Her pale face was framed by dark, meticulously arranged hair, and her eyes, though sharp, appeared veiled in an emotional distance. She was striking, but the coldness in her gaze spoke of a life weighed down by burdens that ran deeper than her beauty. "This is my wife, Lady Evelyn Blackwood," Sir Reginald said, his voice softer than before. There was an almost imperceptible shift in his demeanour as he spoke her name, a brief moment of vulnerability that did not go unnoticed by Holmes. Lady Evelyn offered a curt nod. "Gentlemen," she said, her tone formal, as though she had rehearsed the greeting 100 times. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the disarray in the room, but quickly returned to their impassive state. Holmes took a measured step forward, offering a polite nod in return. "Lady Blackwood, it is a pleasure. I trust your husband has kept you well informed of the situation." Lady Evelyn's lips tightened. "I am well aware, Mr. Holmes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I expect you to handle it with the utmost discretion." Holmes studied her closely, noting the faint tremor in her hand as it rested against her dress. She appeared composed, yet there was something in the stiffness of her movements that suggested a deeper turmoil. It was as though her very presence in the room was a calculated effort to keep her emotions in check. Before Holmes could respond, the door opened again, and a young woman entered. She was more slight in build, with a nervous energy that seemed to pour out of her as she stepped into the room. Margaret, the maid, was not as polished as Lady Evelyn, yet her eyes darted about the room with a palpable unease, as though she were both hesitant and compelled to be there. "This is Margaret, one of our household staff," Sir Reginald introduced with a slight wave of his hand, though his gaze never quite met hers. "She—" Margaret cut him off, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt," she murmured, her eyes avoiding Holmes's gaze as though she were afraid to meet him head-on. "Is there anything I can do?" Holmes turned his attention to her fully now, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. "I believe it would be helpful if you could tell me what you witnessed earlier this evening. Anything that might shed light on the events leading up to Sir Reginald's predicament." Margaret shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. She hesitated, as though considering whether to speak at all. "I didn't see much, sir. Just a strange noise, like something heavy falling, and then I heard voices, but I couldn't tell who they were." Holmes studied her for a long moment, sensing the evasiveness in her words. There was fear in her eyes, and not just from the events earlier. Something about Margaret felt out of place, as though she were hiding something more. Yet the way she fidgeted, her eyes darting away every time someone spoke, suggested an innocence that seemed almost too perfect to be true. "I see," Holmes said slowly, stepping closer to her. "And you are certain that you did not see anyone enter or leave the study?" Margaret's eyes widened, her face pale. "No, sir, I didn't see anyone. I swear she seemed almost desperate, her voice shaking." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but before he could probe further, the door opened once more. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, with a stern expression and an air of quiet authority. The butler, Thomas, appeared, his gaze lingering on each of the occupants in the room before settling on Holmes. "This is Thomas, our butler," Sir Reginald announced, his voice dropping to a lower pitch as though he were mindful of the man's presence. "He has been with us for many years." Thomas's gaze met Holmes's with a level of professionalism that could easily be mistaken for coldness. His dark eyes, set in a face that had weathered years of service, held a quiet understanding, as though he were already aware of the gravity of the situation. Holmes offered a polite nod, though he couldn't help but note the stiffness in Thomas's posture, the way his shoulders were slightly hunched as though carrying a hidden burden. "A pleasure," Holmes said, his tone neutral, yet it held a quiet undertone of scrutiny. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Thomas said, his voice low and respectful. "I trust you will find everything in order. If there is anything I can assist with, I am at your disposal." "Thank you," Holmes replied, his eyes still lingering on Thomas. "For now, I believe the investigation must continue, but I will need to speak to each of you in greater detail shortly." Thomas gave a slight bow of his head before excusing himself, his departure leaving a silence hanging in the air. The tension in the room had only deepened, and the shadows seemed to stretch further as the last words of the butler faded into the stillness. Holmes's gaze shifted from Margaret to Lady Evelyn, and finally to Sir Reginald. Each of them seemed to carry an invisible weight, a history that could not easily be buried. The faintest sound of a distant clock ticking marked the only break in the thick, charged silence. "Well, Mr. Holmes," Sir Reginald said after a long pause, "I trust you now have a better sense of the people involved. I know it is not much to go on, but I assure you, there is much more to this case than meets the eye." Holmes gave a slow nod, his mind already whirling through the information he had gathered. "Indeed, Sir Reginald, and it is only just beginning." The air in Sir Reginald's study grew heavier as Holmes and Watson took their leave of the assembled household, each person retreating into their own part of the mansion. The hallway, now stripped of its earlier warmth, felt colder, more oppressive. The flickering candlelight from the hallway sconces cast jagged shadows along the dark wood panelling, and the faint sound of their footsteps echoed down the narrow corridors. Holmes moved with purpose, his sharp eyes scanning the area as they passed through the maze of hallways. Watson, ever the curious companion, watched Holmes with quiet anticipation, as if expecting some sudden burst of insight. But for the first time since they had arrived, Holmes's usual confidence was tempered by a slight air of uncertainty. His expression was distant, his mind deep in thought, but the faintest flicker of something more, something darker, seemed to linger at the edges of his usually calm demeanour. "I trust you've picked up on the peculiarities, Watson?" Holmes asked without turning to his companion, his voice soft but urgent. "Peculiarities?" Watson replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm afraid I haven't observed anything particularly unusual yet, but I do sense that all is not well here." Holmes gave a quiet nod, his gaze fixed on the end of the hallway, where the light from Sir Reginald's study flickered faintly. "It is more than a sense, Watson. There is something hidden beneath the surface here. The house itself feels out of place. The people, the air they carry with them. It all speaks of a deeper story, one that has yet to be fully revealed." Before Watson could respond, a distant sound echoed through the house. A faint crash. The unmistakable noise of something heavy falling to the floor, followed by a muffled shout. The suddenness of the noise made them both freeze, the hairs on the back of their necks prickling in alarm. Without a word, Holmes turned on his heel and moved swiftly toward the source, his footsteps urgent now, while Watson followed closely behind. They rounded a corner, and there, at the far end of another long corridor, stood Sir Reginald's study, its door slightly ajar. The flickering light from within was accompanied by a soft, unsettling murmur. Voices, faint and indistinct. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he motioned for Watson to stay behind as he approached the door. Peering inside, Holmes's sharp gaze took in the scene before him. The study, once neatly arranged, was now a scene of chaos. Papers lay scattered across the floor, some torn, others crumpled. The furniture was overturned, and the faint glow of candlelight danced across the room's jagged edges. But it was the sight of Sir Reginald himself that caught Holmes's immediate attention. The man was slumped over his desk, unconscious, his face pale and covered in beads of cold sweat. A broken candle holder lay on the floor beside him, its wax pooling in a twisted mess. It had clearly been thrown or knocked over in haste. But more disturbing than the disarray was the cryptic message that had been scrawled hastily across the desk in a pale, powdery substance. "The past always returns in the light." Holmes's eyes quickly swept the room, absorbing every detail with the precision of a master. There was no sign of forced entry, no obvious struggle, nothing to suggest a violent attack. Yet the message, the unnerving symbolism, and Sir Reginald's unconscious state spoke volumes. Someone had intended for this to be far more than a mere act of intimidation. "What do you make of it, Watson?" Holmes asked, his voice calm, though a thin thread of tension ran through it. Watson stepped forward, his own eyes scanning the room. He crouched beside Sir Reginald, checking for signs of life. The man's pulse was faint, his breathing shallow but steady, It was clear that Sir Reginald was alive, but the shock of whatever had occurred seemed to have left him in a state of near collapse. His condition suggests something sudden, Watson mused, glancing up at Holmes. But nothing about this scene feels like a typical attack. It's almost as though the message itself was the intent. Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line as he took in the scene, his mind racing. Yes, that is precisely what troubles me. The message, Watson. The past always returns in the light. It is a deliberate choice. Whoever did this did not merely want to frighten Sir Reginald. They wanted to make a statement about something that is clearly connected to his past. Watson nodded, his expression thoughtful. But what could it mean? The past. A hidden secret, perhaps. Holmes's gaze moved over the room once more, his mind already forming connections between the scattered clues. He reached down and carefully examined the desk, noting the way the wax had spilled in intricate patterns. Something about it seemed wrong, too deliberate. As his fingers brushed the edge of the desk, they grazed something small, a glimmer of metal hidden beneath a pile of papers. He lifted it carefully, revealing a small ancient coin, its surface worn but unmistakably old. The design etched into it was faint, nearly unreadable, but it appeared to be an inscription of some sort. Holmes studied it for a moment before pocketing it with a swift motion. This, too, was another clue, a connection to something larger, though he couldn't yet decipher what. "We need to act quickly," Holmes said, his voice a little firmer now. "Watson, see if you can rouse Sir Reginald. I will examine the room further." Watson immediately knelt beside the unconscious man, carefully lifting him into a sitting position. His hands worked deftly, trying to revive Sir Reginald with small but deliberate movements, though it was clear that the man remained deeply unconscious. Holmes, meanwhile, moved to the far corner of the room, his eyes scanning the walls for any signs of tampering. But nothing seemed out of place, at least not until he noticed something more subtle. A faint trail of dust, disturbed, slightly uneven, led toward the window. Holmes approached it cautiously, pushing the curtains aside to peer into the darkening yard outside. The trail of dust seemed to originate from a small crack in the window frame, one that had been slightly opened, just enough for someone to slip inside unnoticed. A sense of unease crept over him, but before he could further investigate, Watson's voice broke through the tension. "Holmes, I've managed to revive him. Sir Reginald is waking." Holmes's gaze shifted back to the man slumped on the desk. He had hoped for a more immediate answer, but now he would have to extract the truth from Sir Reginald himself. "Good," Holmes replied, turning toward Watson. "It is time to learn exactly what Sir Reginald knows about the past that is now returning in the light." The study, once a room of calculated order, now felt like a broken puzzle, its pieces scattered across the floor in every corner. Holmes stood motionless by the desk, his fingers lightly brushing over the cryptic message that had been hastily scrawled across the surface. The powdery substance left behind by the intruder, chalk or something similar, had been smeared, as though done in a rush. Holmes frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. Watson, after making sure Sir Reginald was settled in a chair with a glass of water, joined Holmes near the desk. Sir Reginald, still pale and shaken, had yet to speak coherently, his mind seemingly clouded by the shock of whatever had occurred. His eyes darted around, his expression vacant, and he gripped the armrests of his chair as though the world itself were slipping away from him. Holmes's gaze swept over the disarray, his mind working swiftly. "Watson, do you see it?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. Watson glanced at the mess, the spilled candle, the overturned papers, the broken chair. But it was the disarray that perplexed him. "The message is certainly unsettling," Watson said, his voice tinged with concern. "But what exactly are we looking for here, Holmes?" Holmes did not answer immediately, his attention still fixed on the chalky inscription. "It is not the message alone that holds significance," he muttered, half to himself. It is the way it was delivered, the intention behind it. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he continued to study the room. Whoever did this wanted us to understand one thing above all else. This was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated gesture, a key to something deeper, something hidden. Watson frowned, his mind racing to catch up. The past, he repeated, the words heavy with implication. But what could it mean? Holmes turned sharply to Watson, his eyes alight with the intensity of discovery. The past, Watson, is not simply a series of events lost to time. Number it is something that, if not confronted, can return to haunt us. Whoever left this message wants Sir Reginald to confront something he thought was buried. Their conversation was interrupted by a faint groan from Sir Reginald, who shifted uneasily in his seat. Holmes's eyes flicked toward the man, and he moved toward him swiftly, his boots tapping softly against the wooden floor. "Sir Reginald," Holmes said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can you hear me?" Sir Reginald's eyes fluttered open, his gaze still unfocused. His breathing was shallow, and his face was drawn with exhaustion. His lips parted, but the words that escaped were strained, barely audible. It has returned. The light. It knows. It knows everything." Holmes leaned closer, his voice lowering to a calm yet insistent tone. "What does it know, Sir Reginald? What is this about? The light, the message." Sir Reginald seemed to recoil slightly, his hands trembling. He looked toward the desk, his eyes briefly locking onto the scrawled message, his expression shifting with a mixture of fear and recognition. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I thought I had put it all behind me. But now, it comes for me again. The artifact. The truth." Holmes's interest piqued, and he immediately pressed, his tone more urgent. "The artifact? Sir Reginald, tell me everything you know. What artifact?" Sir Reginald's eyes darted about the room, as though searching for an escape. His breathing grew quicker, more shallow, as the words seemed to slip through his fingers. "It's in the light, in the lamp. I kept it there, hidden, for protection." He looked down at his hands, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I never wanted anyone to know. It was too dangerous. I didn't want the past to come back. But now it's too late." Holmes's gaze locked on Sir Reginald's trembling hands, noting the rigidness in his posture. There was something deeply unsettling about the man's reaction. The truth was beginning to emerge, but it was shrouded in fear of something far greater than just an old secret. Holmes could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him, and he knew that Sir Reginald was teetering on the edge of a precipice. "Where is the lamp, Sir Reginald?" Holmes asked, his voice sharp and commanding. Sir Reginald's gaze flickered toward the far corner of the study, where a tall, ornate lamp stood on a small side table, its shade cast in shadow. His body went rigid. "It's there," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "But, please, Mr. Holmes, you must understand. It cannot be opened. It must remain hidden." Holmes's eyes flickered to the lamp. The peculiar sense of dread that had settled over the room deepened. There was something about that lamp, something far more important than its ornamental appearance. Without a word, Holmes moved toward it. His steps were measured, deliberate, as though he were walking into a room of fragile glass, careful not to disturb what had long remained undisturbed. Watson, his curiosity piqued, moved to follow, though he hesitated as he caught sight of Sir Reginald's panicked expression. "Holmes, perhaps we should wait." Holmes raised a hand to silence him. "No, Watson, we are past waiting. We are past hesitation." His voice was low but resolute, carrying an air of certainty that Watson had come to know all too well. Holmes reached the lamp and with a careful motion lifted it from the table. The weight of it was solid, and the cold metal sent a chill through his fingertips as he inspected it closely. There was something about the way it had been placed, its base slightly askew, that struck him as odd. It didn't fit with the rest of the room, the rest of the furniture, or even the rest of the house. It was too deliberate, too out of place. With a deliberate motion, Holmes twisted the lamp's base. It turned easily in his hands, and as he did, a hidden compartment in the base slowly clicked open. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a small ancient coin, the same kind Holmes had found earlier on the desk. His pulse quickened as he carefully lifted it out, feeling the cold weight of the object in his hand. "This coin," Holmes muttered to himself. "This is the key to everything." He turned back to Sir Reginald, who had watched him with wide, fearful eyes. "Sir Reginald, this coin, it's connected to the message, to the past you thought you had buried. What is its significance? What does it reveal?" Sir Reginald seemed on the verge of collapse, his face ashen as he trembled violently in his seat. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. It was as though he had reached the limit of what he could say, and whatever lay beyond that threshold was too dangerous to utter. Holmes stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the trembling man. "Sir Reginald," he pressed, his voice calm but insistent, "you must tell me what you know. Everything." The study was silent for a long moment, the only sound being the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Sir Reginald's breath came in short, shallow gasps, and for a moment Holmes wondered if the man would speak at all. But then, in a voice barely audible, Sir Reginald finally whispered, "The coin. It was never meant to be found. It is the last piece of a puzzle that I've spent my life running from. But it's too late now. The past has returned." The fire in Sir Reginald's study had burned low, casting a faint glow that now seemed inconsequential to the storm of emotions brewing within the room. Holmes, still holding the coin, turned it over in his fingers, examining it closely. The weight of the object seemed to echo the weight of the moment. Sir Reginald's admission had been a pivotal one. This coin, this hidden relic, was far more than a mere artifact. It was a symbol of a deeper, unresolved conflict, one that stretched far beyond the walls of this house. "Sir Reginald," Holmes began, his voice a study in measured calm, "you must understand that this is no ordinary coin. Its presence here, hidden in the lamp, speaks of far more than just a past you wish to forget. It is a key, and we are not yet in possession of the full puzzle." Sir Reginald, still slumped in his chair, looked up at Holmes with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You don't understand, Mr. Holmes. This coin, it's tied to a part of my life I thought I had buried long ago. But now it's back. It's all come back, and it's too late for me to stop it." Holmes's brow furrowed slightly, and he leaned forward, his voice lower now. "Tell me, Sir Reginald, what happened all those years ago? What is this coin a part of?" But Sir Reginald's hands trembled violently, and his voice cracked under the weight of the unspoken truth. I can't speak of it. Not now. Not yet. It's too dangerous." Holmes gave a long, measured sigh, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man before him. His gaze flicked briefly to Watson, who had remained quietly in the background, absorbing every word but offering no comment. The tension in the room was palpable, heavy with unspoken fears, secrets, and the growing realization that something far darker than they had anticipated was unfolding. Watson stepped forward, his expression both concerned and resolute. "Sir Reginald, if you want our help, you must trust us. We cannot solve this mystery unless you share what you know." The plea in Watson's voice seemed to reach Sir Reginald, but only for a moment. He swallowed hard, looking as though every word were a battle, and yet he remained silent. It was clear that the man was trapped in some way, bound by his own fears, unwilling to confront the past that had finally come knocking. Holmes's patience, however, was unwavering. He placed the coin on the desk with deliberate care, and then turned his attention toward the others in the room, his sharp eyes scanning their faces. "I need to speak with the others," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Lady Evelyn, Margaret, Thomas, all of you must be questioned. One of you knows more than you're letting on." Lady Evelyn's gaze flickered towards Sir Reginald, her lips tightening, but she did not speak. Holmes saw the subtle shift in her posture, the way she clasped her hands tightly together in her lap. She was not afraid, but she was withholding something important. With a final lingering glance at Sir Reginald, Holmes turned and moved toward the door. Watson followed, though he cast one last look over his shoulder, as if hoping for some final revelation. But there was nothing, only the silence that followed them as they exited the study. The grand hallway stretched out before them, its dark wood panels and flickering candlelight giving the impression of a place frozen in time. As they walked, Holmes's eyes swept over the paintings on the walls, the shadowed figures frozen in moments of joy or contemplation. But each of them seemed distant now, removed from the present by the heavy, invisible barrier that surrounded Sir Reginald's house. They passed through a narrow doorway and into a sitting room, where Lady Evelyn sat, her expression cool and composed, but her eyes betraying a flicker of concern. She did not rise when Holmes and Watson entered. Instead, she motioned for them to take seats. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice calm, but with a quiet edge. "I presume you've been questioning my husband. He has been under a great deal of strain lately. The events of the past few days have brought much of it to the surface." Holmes took a seat across from her, studying her carefully. "Lady Evelyn, the circumstances surrounding your husband's distress are concerning. He has not been entirely forthcoming with me about the nature of the threat. I must ask, what do you know of the coin? And the message?" Her lips tightened, and she glanced briefly toward the hallway, as though considering the proximity of others. "My husband." She trailed off, her voice faltering for the briefest of moments. "My husband has always been a man of ambition, but that ambition has come at a price. We both paid that price, though I'm not sure either of us truly understood what it would cost." Holmes's eyes never left her face, though he made no attempt to interrupt. Her discomfort was palpable, but her words held more weight than she realized. "The coin," he prompted gently. "You know more about it than you've let on." Lady Evelyn's gaze dropped to the floor, and for the first time, she seemed to struggle with her composure. "It was from his past, from a time before we were married, something he never spoke of, and something I was too willing to ignore." She paused, her hands clenching into fists in her lap. "It's part of something darker, a secret that I have no right to uncover. It's his burden, not mine." Holmes leaned forward slightly, his tone unwavering. "Lady Evelyn, your husband's burden is now yours as well. This coin, this message, it is not a burden that can be carried alone. Whatever the cost, it is time to face it." For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the room thickened, and Watson's gaze shifted uneasily between the two of them, sensing the weight of the conversation, but unsure of how to move it forward. Lady Evelyn's gaze finally met Holmes's, her eyes now more open, though still clouded with uncertainty. "It's too late," she whispered. "The past has already begun to claim us." Holmes stood up abruptly, his patience thinning. "Then we have no time to waste." The grand clock in the hallway chimed softly, its sound muffled by the oppressive silence that seemed to hang heavily over the house. Holmes stood at the window, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape beyond, his mind whirring with the weight of what had been revealed thus far. Lady Evelyn's cryptic words had done little to assuage his growing suspicion. If anything, they had only deepened the mystery. Sir Reginald's past, though shrouded in secrecy, seemed to be the key to understanding the strange events that had unfolded. Yet, as he gazed out into the fog-shrouded grounds, Holmes felt that they were no closer to the truth than they had been when they first arrived. Watson, standing beside him, observed the scene in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. "Holmes," he finally said, breaking the quiet, "you don't look convinced. Do you think Lady Evelyn knows more than she's letting on? Holmes's sharp gaze flicked toward Watson, his expression unreadable. I believe she is hiding something, he said, his voice low and controlled. But she is not the only one. Every person in this household carries a secret, whether they know it or not, and I suspect one of them is far closer to the truth than they realize. Watson nodded thoughtfully, his brow furrowing. And Sir Reginald? Holmes turned fully toward him, his eyes narrowing. He knows more than he said. But his fear is so deep-rooted, Watson, that I am certain he has not yet told us the full extent of the danger he faces. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Holmes's gaze shifted toward the door, and he nodded for Watson to answer. The butler, Thomas, entered the room with his usual silent grace. His face was impassive, but his eyes, though carefully masked, betrayed an unmistakable sense of urgency. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Thomas began, his voice low and respectful. I have spoken with Lady Evelyn, and she has requested your presence. There is a matter that must be discussed. Holmes studied him for a moment, his mind already assessing the situation. Thomas's manner was formal, but there was something off, something more than the usual dutifulness he exhibited. The butler's posture was slightly stiff, his gaze fixed on the floor, and his voice carried a faint tremor beneath its professional veneer. I will accompany you, Holmes said after a beat, his tone as calm as ever. Lead the way. The trio moved through the winding halls of the house, the faint glow of lamps casting long shadows across the walls. As they approached the sitting room, Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. Something crucial was on the verge of being revealed. He had learned that in his line of work, the smallest of details often held the most significant meaning. The unspoken tension in the air felt like an invitation to something darker, and he could not ignore the sense that they were all walking into a trap. When they entered the sitting room, Lady Evelyn was already there, sitting by the fire, her posture stiff and formal. The moment she looked up, Holmes sensed the change in her demeanor. Gone was the distant, controlled figure from earlier. In her place was someone who seemed far more vulnerable, her expression one of quiet resolve, as though she had made a decision and was now prepared to carry its weight. Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice soft but steady. I believe it is time you knew the full truth. The secrets my husband and I have buried for so long cannot stay hidden any longer. I owe you the truth. Holmes took a step closer, his eyes studying her carefully. You've come to a decision, then? Lady Evelyn nodded, her fingers lightly gripping the armrest of her chair. I must speak of it now, before it is too late. She paused, gathering her thoughts, before she spoke again, her voice breaking the silence like the first crack of thunder before a storm. My husband and I were involved in something very dangerous. It began with his work, with the discoveries he made in his early academic years. At first, they seemed insignificant, just another academic pursuit. But there was one discovery. A relic. A coin, just like the one you found. It was part of a larger set, a collection that could unlock secrets that should never have been uncovered. Holmes's eyes flickered with recognition as she spoke of the coin. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, though there was still much to understand. And this relic, Holmes said, his voice barely a whisper, it holds the key to something? Lady Evelyn's eyes clouded with a mixture of guilt and fear. Yes. It is said that when all the pieces are assembled, the truth will be revealed. The truth about the past, about what was done to acquire it. She looked down at her hands, her voice faltering. We were young, foolish. My husband was obsessed with the idea of power, of uncovering things others would rather leave buried. The coin was part of a deal with a man named Dr. Felix Graham. At the mention of the name, Holmes's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Felix Graham, a name from Sir Reginald's past that had been alluded to but never fully explained. The connections were becoming clearer by the moment, but Holmes still needed more. Dr. Graham? Watson asked, his voice sharp with a sudden realization. The same man who was believed dead? Holmes finished for him, his eyes locking onto Lady Evelyn's. Yes, I suspect Dr. Graham faked his death, and now I believe he is the one behind this, behind the threats, behind the cryptic message. Lady Evelyn's gaze flickered to Thomas, who had remained silent during the exchange. The butler's expression remained unreadable, but Holmes could sense a subtle shift in the room. There was more, of course, always more, but Lady Evelyn's confession had revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle. Dr. Felix Graham had never been fully gone, and he was now pulling strings in the shadows, manipulating events to his own advantage. I must insist, Lady Evelyn, Holmes said, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room, that you tell me everything you know about Dr. Graham. His role in this, his connection to your husband's past. It is imperative that we understand it all. Lady Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting toward Thomas, who stood at the far corner of the room, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. A quiet tension seemed to fill the space between them before she spoke again. There is more, she said softly, but I fear it may be too late to stop what's coming. Dr. Graham will not rest until he has what he wants. And Sir Reginald, he is the one standing in his way. The air in the sitting room grew thick with tension as Holmes carefully processed Lady Evelyn's words. She had at last provided the missing link in the chain, a connection to Dr. Felix Graham, the elusive academic rival who had apparently resurfaced after years of silence. Holmes had known something darker lurked beneath the surface of Sir Reginald's past, but the full extent of the story had not yet been revealed. Now, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but there was still much to be understood. Holmes's gaze shifted from Lady Evelyn to Watson, his sharp mind working rapidly to weave together the information they had gathered. Dr. Graham, he said quietly, as if testing the weight of the name on his tongue. A man with a reputation that precedes him, and yet a man whose presence has been buried for years. It seems unlikely that he would have remained silent for so long, especially when the very relic that connects him to Sir Reginald's past was still out there, hidden in plain sight. Watson stood by the fire, his eyes flickering between Holmes and Lady Evelyn, unsure of how to proceed. Holmes, if Dr. Graham is behind all of this, why now? What has triggered this resurgence of his interest in Sir Reginald? Holmes's sharp eyes turned toward Watson, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That, my dear Watson, is the question we must answer. The coin, the relic, it is more than just a simple artifact. It holds significance, but it is not its mere existence that has brought Dr. Graham out of hiding. No, Watson, it is what it represents. The key, the catalyst to a greater truth, one that neither Sir Reginald nor Dr. Graham could leave behind. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, and she looked nervously at Thomas, who had remained silent since entering the room. You don't understand, she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. The truth that the coin holds, it is not something I can easily explain. It has been buried for so long, and my husband and I have done everything in our power to keep it hidden. But now, with the coin back in the open, I fear that everything we've worked so hard to protect is about to be destroyed. Holmes's expression softened for a moment, his gaze steady and reassuring as he turned to face her. Lady Evelyn, I do not wish to rush you, but we must understand the truth. The past, as you said, has returned, but it has returned for a reason. Dr. Graham seeks something more than just revenge. He wants power, knowledge, something far deeper than a mere academic victory. Watson stepped forward, his brow furrowing as he considered the implications of Holmes's words. Holmes, if Dr. Graham is truly the one pulling the strings, what does he want with the coin? Why has he left these cryptic messages, these threats? Holmes's eyes glittered with quiet intensity, his mind turning over the clues they had gathered. The messages, the coin, the attack on Sir Reginald, They are all pieces of a larger plan, Watson. A plan that revolves around the hidden truth contained within that relic. It is no accident that Sir Reginald was targeted first. Dr. Graham, though a brilliant academic, is also a man consumed by his own obsessions. The coin is a symbol, a key that will unlock the truth. But that truth is not just academic. It is personal. It is tied to a betrayal, to a crime that neither of them could escape. The fire crackled in the silence that followed Holmes's words, the soft popping of the flames breaking the stillness. Lady Evelyn seemed to recoil at the mention of betrayal, her hand trembling as she clutched the armrest of her chair. "You're right, Mr. Holmes," she said in a barely audible voice. "The coin holds the truth, but it also holds the weight of what we did, what my husband did. And now, it seems we are paying the price for that." Holmes turned toward her, his eyes steady and calculating. "What did Sir Reginald do, Lady Evelyn? What is the truth that you're both running from?" For a long moment, there was no answer. The room was silent, except for the faint rustling of the wind outside and the low hum of the fire. Lady Evelyn's face was pale, her eyes haunted by the ghosts of the past. Thomas, who had been standing at the edge of the room, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. "I will tell you," Lady Evelyn said finally, her voice a fragile whisper. "But you must understand, Mr. Holmes, that this is not something I take lightly. It will not be easy to hear." Holmes's expression softened, and he nodded. "We are here to find the truth, Lady Evelyn. All of it." Lady Evelyn took a deep breath, as if summoning the strength to speak. "It began years ago, before I met Sir Reginald. He was an ambitious young man, full of promise and eager to make a name for himself in the academic world. But there was something darker in his pursuit, something that led him to seek out unorthodox methods of research. That is when he met Dr. Graham. The two of them formed a partnership of sorts, one that went beyond mere academic rivalry. They were both searching for something hidden, something that was never meant to be found." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Lady Evelyn's as she spoke, hanging on every word. "And what was this thing they were searching for?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered with a brief flash of fear, but she continued. "A relic, an ancient artifact that had been lost for centuries. A coin, but not just any coin. A coin said to have belonged to an ancient order. Whoever possessed it would hold the key to vast knowledge that could alter the course of history." Watson frowned, his mind racing to keep up with the revelations. "And this coin, it is the same one we've been talking about?" Lady Evelyn nodded, her face pale. "Yes, the same one. But what Sir Reginald and Dr. Graham didn't know was that the coin was cursed. It carried a terrible secret, a price that neither of them could afford to pay. And when they found it, when they unlocked its power, they unwittingly unleashed something they couldn't control." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "What was it they unleashed, Lady Evelyn? What did they find?" But Lady Evelyn's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice faltering. "I can't say. Not yet. But what I can tell you is that Dr. Graham has been seeking it ever since. And now he has come back for the coin and for what it promises." The sitting room had grown heavy with the weight of Lady Evelyn's revelation. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long, dancing shadows along the walls, the flames now seeming too fragile to hold back the darkness that had descended within the room. Holmes stood at the centre of the space, his figure cast long by the light, while Watson remained silent, processing the enormity of what they had just learned. The quiet was suffocating, as if the very air itself held its breath, waiting for the next step. Holmes, his sharp mind working at a fever pitch, glanced at Lady Evelyn once more. Her confession had opened a door, but it had only led to more questions. The coin, the relic, the secret buried in the past. Everything pointed to something much larger than a simple rivalry between Sir Reginald and Dr. Graham. There was a curse, a price that had been paid. And now, it seemed, Dr. Graham would stop at nothing to reclaim the coin and whatever power it promised. Lady Evelyn, Holmes said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. I understand the gravity of what you've told me, but we are no closer to understanding the full extent of Dr. Graham's intentions. You say he is seeking the coin, but what does he want with it? Why now? Lady Evelyn's eyes, still wide with fear, flickered toward the window, as if seeking some sort of refuge in the darkened world beyond. I don't know. The coin, Mr. Holmes, it was never meant to be found. It holds knowledge, yes, but it also brings destruction. It is said that whoever possesses it will gain unimaginable power, but they will also lose something vital. Sir Reginald and Dr. Graham both knew this, but they were consumed by their ambitions. The cost was something they couldn't escape. Holmes's gaze never wavered from her face. But why has Dr. Graham returned now? Why not before? Lady Evelyn's face paled further, and her fingers trembled as she clutched the armrest of her chair. I don't know. It's as if he's been waiting for something. Perhaps the coin is finally ready to reveal its truth. But Sir Reginald never wanted it to be used again. He locked it away. He kept it hidden, hoping it would never see the light of day. And now it has come back, and so has Dr. Graham. Holmes stepped back, his mind racing, running through the possibilities, the clues, the hidden meanings. The fire crackled in the background, the sound like a heartbeat in the room. There was something else here. Something beneath the surface of Lady Evelyn's words. Something that didn't sit right. Dr. Graham, as obsessed as he was with the coin, wasn't simply after power. He had already known its power. This wasn't just about that. It was about control. He wanted control over something deeper than Sir Reginald and the coin itself. He wanted control over the past. The moment stretched on, and then Holmes turned sharply toward Watson, who had been silent for the most part, absorbing the conversation but offering little commentary. His face was drawn, his brow furrowed with concentration, as he silently processed the truth that had begun to emerge. It's a puzzle, Watson, Holmes said suddenly, his voice cutting through the thick silence like a razor. This isn't just about a relic or some academic rivalry. Dr. Graham is trying to resurrect something from the past that neither Sir Reginald nor he could ever bury. He doesn't care about power in the conventional sense. He wants to rewrite history. Watson blinked, clearly taken aback. Rewrite history? How do you mean? Holmes's eyes gleamed with a sudden realization, a flash of clarity that pierced through the fog of mystery. The coin isn't just a key to power, it's a key to knowledge. But it's not knowledge in the traditional sense, Watson. It's knowledge of the past. A past that Sir Reginald and Dr. Graham both tried to bury. They thought the coin was merely an artifact, but it was far more than that. It holds the truth of what they did. The truth of their actions that neither man could live with. Lady Evelyn's hands trembled as she listened to Holmes's deduction, but she remained silent, her face drawn with guilt. She knew, perhaps better than anyone else in the room, that Holmes was on the verge of discovering something she had long hoped would remain hidden. Where is Dr. Graham now? Holmes demanded, his eyes narrowing, his voice steady but urgent. Where has he been all this time? Why didn't he strike sooner? Lady Evelyn's gaze faltered. He's been here, Mr. Holmes. He's been hiding in plain sight. Holmes froze, his heart skipping a beat as he absorbed the weight of her words. Here? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. In this house? Yes, Lady Evelyn replied, her voice strained with the realization of the truth. Dr. Graham never left. He's been living among us, posing as someone else. A trusted associate, a friend to Sir Reginald. He's been manipulating everything from the shadows. Watson's eyes widened in shock. You mean... Yes, Holmes said, cutting Watson off. He's here, Watson. He's been here all along. And now, he is ready to reveal himself. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door. It was not the soft, respectful knock of a servant, or the hesitant rap of a worried household staff member. This was the sound of someone who had come with purpose, someone who had waited for the right moment. Holmes turned toward the door, his hand instinctively moving to the concealed pocket where he always kept his small revolver. "Stay alert, Watson," he murmured. The door opened slowly, and in the dim light, a figure stepped into the room. It was a man of medium height, his features sharp and angular, his movements deliberate and calm. He wore a dark coat, and his eyes glinted with an unsettling mixture of intelligence and arrogance. His lips curled into a faint smile as he locked eyes with Holmes. "Mr. Holmes," the man said smoothly, his voice low but tinged with amusement. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. The man was familiar. His voice, his presence, all too recognizable. It was Dr. Felix Graham, standing there, unmasked, no longer hiding in the shadows. The room stood still, heavy with the presence of the man who had just revealed himself as Dr. Felix Graham. His calm demeanor only heightened the tension that crackled in the air, as if everything that had led to this moment, the discoveries, the secrets, the growing darkness, had all been leading to this final confrontation. Holmes stood unmoving, his eyes sharp and calculating as he studied Dr. Graham, taking in the subtle but unmistakable changes in the man's posture, his smirk, and the way he now stood before them like a predator that had been toying with its prey. "Dr. Graham," Holmes said, his voice low and steady. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to be here, hiding in plain sight all this time. But now that you've decided to reveal yourself, I trust you'll explain your involvement in all of this." Dr. Graham's smile never faltered as he took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his eyes never leaving Holmes. His voice was smooth, almost condescending. "Mr. Holmes, always so perceptive. You've unraveled my little game, I see. But let's not pretend you've discovered everything. The coin, the relic, it was never meant to stay hidden. You've only scratched the surface of what's truly at stake." Lady Evelyn, who had remained silently seated near the fire, watched the exchange with a mixture of fear and resignation. Her fingers were clasped tightly together in her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric of her dress. She seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of Dr. Graham's presence had drained her of whatever strength she had left. Her gaze flickered to Sir Reginald, who sat motionless by the window, his face pale and etched with guilt. Holmes turned his attention briefly to Lady Evelyn before speaking again. "You've been manipulating events from the shadows, using Sir Reginald's past to pull the strings. But now, the truth is out. What exactly is it that you seek, Dr. Graham? What do you hope to gain by revealing yourself now?" Dr. Graham's lips curled slightly upward, his eyes glinting with an almost manic intensity. "What do I seek, Mr. Holmes? It's simple. Power, knowledge, control. The coin is the key to unlocking a truth that Sir Reginald and I have both been running from for years. But while Sir Reginald hid from it, I embraced it. You see, the coin isn't just an artifact. It's a map, a guide to something far more profound. A truth that, if properly harnessed, can alter the very course of history." Holmes studied him carefully, his gaze flicking over Dr. Graham's face, searching for the underlying motive behind his words. "And you believe that controlling this truth will give you what exactly? Immortality? Absolute power?" Dr. Graham chuckled softly, almost as if amused by the question. "No, Mr. Holmes. It's not about immortality, nor is it about brute force. It's about understanding. The coin leads to a place, to a truth that very few men have ever even dreamed of. A place where knowledge is limitless, where the boundaries of the past can be rewritten." Holmes's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his voice growing more intense. "You speak of rewriting the past, but you forget, Dr. Graham, that the past cannot be undone. It shapes us. It cannot simply be erased, no matter how much you wish to control it." The smile on Dr. Graham's face faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "Perhaps you're right, Mr. Holmes. The past cannot be erased, but it can be understood, manipulated. And that is precisely what I intend to do." As Dr. Graham spoke, Holmes's mind raced, his thoughts whirling like a storm. The key to understanding Dr. Graham's motives lay not in his obsession with the coin or the knowledge it represented, but in his desperate desire to control what had happened between him and Sir Reginald. The coin had always been a symbol, a tether to the past, but it had also become a tool, a weapon used to exact revenge, to rewrite the past in Dr. Graham's image. Holmes's gaze flicked towards Sir Reginald, who was now standing by the window, his face drawn and haggard. There was no strength in the man's posture, no defiance. He looked as if he had already given up, already resigned himself to whatever consequences awaited him. "Sir Reginald," Holmes called softly, his voice carrying across the room. "Tell me, what is it that you've hidden from us? What is the true nature of your connection to Dr. Graham? You know more than you've said." Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped, and he turned slowly toward Holmes. His face was lined with years of regret, of guilt. "I never wanted this to happen, Holmes. I never wanted any of this. But the moment we found the coin, Dr. Graham and I, we unleashed something we didn't understand, something I couldn't control." "Unleashed?" Holmes pressed. "What did you unleash, Sir Reginald?" For a long moment, Sir Reginald said nothing. His hands were trembling as he gripped the back of a chair for support. "We thought we were scholars," he whispered, his voice ragged. "But we were fools. The coin didn't just give us knowledge. It made us part of something far darker. A secret society, a network of men who had hidden away this knowledge for centuries. But the coin, it was never meant to be found. And once it was, everything changed." Holmes's eyes widened slightly as he processed Sir Reginald's words. The coin, it seemed, had not merely been an object of academic value. It was a key to something much more dangerous, a network of individuals who had safeguarded knowledge too powerful to be allowed to resurface. "I see," Holmes murmured, his voice contemplative. "And now Dr. Graham wants to finish what you started, to take control of that knowledge for himself." "Yes," Sir Reginald replied, his voice shaking. "He wants to rewrite everything, Mr. Holmes. He wants to control the past, the future, everything." Holmes turned back to Dr. Graham, who stood there, still watching with that same calculated smile. "But you won't succeed, Doctor. Graham," Holmes said firmly, "you cannot control what has already been set into motion. The past is not yours to manipulate." Dr. Graham's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering for the briefest moment. "We shall see, Mr. Holmes. We shall see." Suddenly there was a soft noise, almost imperceptible, a distant sound from outside, the faintest echo of a door opening. But it was enough. Holmes's eyes snapped toward the window, and for the first time he felt a cold certainty settle over him. He had anticipated this moment for days, but now that it was here, the final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place.